Now, as you can see, our fill is beautiful and very bright. So I'm very happy with the way it turned out. Hey you guys, I'm so excited. Today I want to share with you how I color fill my laser engravings. Here is one example. I have another one over here. So I'm going to share with you what I use, how to do it, how not to do it. And without any further ado, let's get started. Now I did record the whole process and I'm going to play for you after we talk a little bit about the process. So first of all, the whole laser engrave fill starts with a laser engraving. So what you need to do is first create a pocket like this. My pocket was about 1/8 inch deep. So that's what I like to do when I fill my engravings. I don't do it often, but when I do it, that's what I'm using. For my settings, for my CO2 55 watt laser, for the settings, I used power 90 and speed 70. Now, when it comes to filling your engraving, you could use epoxy or you can use paint. I don't use paint just because I feel epoxy it's more durable, so I pretty much always turn to epoxy. When it comes to the epoxy, I have two of them that I use all the time. I have this one over here. I'll put links to these guys in the description below. And the reason I like using these guys is because once I mix it, in about 12 minutes, I'm ready to sand. So it cures super fast. I'm also going to tell you the downsides of this, but that's one of the items that I use. And then my other epoxy that I use is this one. None of these are sponsored. I bought this with my own money. As you can see, it says it's ready to demold in 4 hours and it's fully cured in 8 to 10 hours. When I use this one, I find that around 5 hours later, I'm ready to sand. So that's another option out there to use for filling your engravings. When it comes to what do I put on my epoxy to color it, I pretty much always use mica powder. And I have a few brands that I like. Black Diamond is my favorite one. And then I use Ecopoxy, I use Mayspring, I think it's called. There are a few different good brands. Black Diamond, it is my favorite brand when it comes to pigment. I use mica powder pigment, and they come in all varieties of colors and such, so it's a lot to choose from. Now, remember I told you I really like this epoxy because you can sand it in 12 minutes. So within 20 minutes, your engraving is completely done and sanded. Well, there is some downside to that particular epoxy. The downside is that when it cures, it turns white. So if you put no pigment in it, when you mix it, it looks very clear like water. It is very runny, which is great for this kind of job. But then when it cures, it becomes white. Now, that could work on your advantage when you're working with colors like blues, greens, reds, and so on. Even whites, because it will make your fill brighter because it has that white undertone to it. And white with the pigment, it just makes it so much brighter, so you can really see the pigment pop. The downside to that is that because it has that white, it cures white, when you use metallic pigments, you get kind of a washed off metallic like this one over here. This was supposed to be gold and it kind of looks washed off. It doesn't have that pop of metallic. So those are some downsides of using that particular epoxy. But if you're just using it with colors, like I said, yellows, whites, greens, blues, that is my favorite one to use just because it's also super fast. Now, if I would work with metallics and I really want to have that metallic look, I would go for this one because this one is truly clear and it cures clear. So this is also a great one for using for filling up little holes if you do an epoxy charcuterie board or a cross or river table. This one cures pretty fast, so it makes really easy patching. Now, I have a few samples here that I was experimented with on the same plank of walnut. I tried different pigments and let me just show you my results and then I'll let you watch the whole process and we'll talk about it, how not to get color bleed into your wood and so on. So this is, like I said, it's that fast resin with just pigment in it and it ended up fantastic. Here is the same epoxy with a lighter golden kind of pigment, and that one ended up really well. Then I used over here onto this one, the fill is fantastic, as you can see, really good quality, but the color is very drab. And for this one I used, let me see if I can find it. For this one I used that fast curing epoxy, but I mixed it with brass powder, so it has no pigment in it, it's just brass powder. So this is really heavy, this is real metal, real brass shavings that are crushed very, very small. So that's what I mixed in my epoxy to make this fill. And it just disappointed on walnut just because it's too dark for the wood. If it was on a lighter wood, I think it would have looked beautiful. But for this particular application, it just didn't work out so well. Another fail I had when I used a very, very metallic pigment. I use this Mainspring Gilded Gold, and this says it's true metallic powder, so I'm not sure, so it's not mica powder maybe. I don't know what it is, but that one reacted with my epoxy. As you can see, when I poured it into the fill, I did not sand it. It kind of bubbled up, so now it stays raised up, so we have like a textured fill. And I'm curious if I sand it what it's gonna look like. But it did have a reaction and it did not work properly. So before you do a project, do test what you're going to use, because you never know how it will react. So as you can see, that one bubbled up, and now we have this textured fill. Also, you want to put enough pigment. You want to use more pigment than you would think it takes, because you do want to have that color pop. Don't put too much pigment. I put too much pigment in here, and the product hardened before I was even able to pour it into the engraving. So I have a big mess in here because it took seconds for it to harden because I put too much pigment. You will see that in the clip coming up. Now, the reason you want to use a faster curing epoxy is because if you're using a deep pour epoxy, it's very thin, it will work, you can mix your pigment in it and then you pour it, but because those epoxies are meant to pour very deep, if you pour it very shallow, like 1/8 inch, it will take like 10 days for it to harden. If it will harden, sometimes it just still stays bendy. And then also, because it sits there for so long and it takes a long time for it to cure, it will seep into the pores of your wood, so you will have color bleed. Now, there are ways to prevent color bleed, but not from that deep pour epoxy, more for when you're using an epoxy like this that takes like, 4-6 hours. There are ways to prevent color bleed, and I will show you how to do it in a second. Now here is my sample planks, and the engraving, like I said, it's about 3 millimeter, about 1/8 of an inch. So that's what I'm starting with, and I have 4 planks here to test. And I did give them a quick sanding. You do not need to do this since you have to sand them after you put the epoxy anyway. I use this triple thick glaze, and this is how you prevent the bleeding. You spray it after the engraving, you spray it on your plank of wood. I did 2 generous coats here, and then you want to let it dry before you pour your epoxy. So prevent bleeding, use what I used, the triple thick spray, or you can use shellac or any varnish that you want to use to seal the pores. We're using these tiny little cups, and then we're using a plastic spoon, some stirrers, gloves of course, and I'm using the fast curing epoxy. The easiest way to measure, it's a 1-to-1 epoxy, so I just use 1 teaspoon of the part A with 1 teaspoon of part B, and you want to give it a really quick good stir, but you don't want to stir for too long. This epoxy, like I said, it will start to set within seconds. If you're mixing for a full minute, it's probably going to be really hard and you cannot mix it anymore. So only about 15 seconds of mixing, and then quickly add the pigment. For this particular one, I think I used the green. Yes, the green pigment. So I put a generous amount in there. Give it a quick mix. You don't want to have like dry powder. You want everything to be incorporated, and then pour it into your engraving. And that's pretty much the whole process. It is super simple. Like I said, you do not want to wait too long. It will thicken in seconds. and it will be fully cured in about 12 minutes. So this was my first experiment with the green, and just make sure it goes in all the grooves, move around it with the stir stick. And then I like to use this business cards, the metal business cards that people use to engrave on it. I like to use those as a scraper just to scrape off the excess. That way it gives me a little bit easier time on sanding. So that's what I'm doing here. And when you scrape the surface, you also can see if you missed any parts in the engraving with the fill. So that's what I'm doing here. Once I'm done with this one, I'll set it aside and we move on into the next one. Now, the next one is the brass powder. And like I said, this is real metal, very, very fine dust of brass. And I put a generous amount into the epoxy. You want to use about a third volume as you have epoxy. And mix it really, really quickly and then pour it into the engraving. The brass powder does not tend to seep into the pores, so I've never had problems with bleeding using this. So I really like it, but on walnut it just did not look so good. It looked very drab. Wiping off the excess and moving on. Here is where I added too much pigment. I used this gilded gold, which is super, super metallic. And I added a ton of it because I wanted to see if I can get it really, really looking like metal. And I mixed it, and it was a lot of powder, so I tried to mix it really well, and it started hardening on me. And then I tried to pour it. It was still liquid when I poured it, but by the time I spread it, it turned into pretty much a solid. You will see here how quickly it hardens. This is sped up, I think, 4 or 8 times, I'm not sure, in post, but at this point I cannot even spread it anymore. It is super hard. So I peel off the paper, but it was just unworkable. It was a big disaster. You can see it's completely hard in the container. You could not even poke it with a stick anymore. So then I did it again, and this time I put a lot less pigment, and I think this is the one that bubbled up, so it had some sort of a reaction because it did bubble up like crazy. So that's that one over here. And then of course once it's cured, which by the time I was done with all those experiments, the first one was totally cured because it only took me about 10 minutes, and gave it a quick sanding. I went through all the grids from 80 all the way to 220, and then just put some boar butter on it just so you guys can see what it would look like. I hope the one thing you took from this video is that you need to test before do a project. Test with exactly the epoxy you're going to use, with the pigment you're going to use, because you never know how it will react. So lesson learned here. I always do a small test. It doesn't have to be a big flower like this. It could just be like a small square. Now I hope this was helpful to you and you learned something new. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Skylar Ewing, and I'll see you in my next video.